Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Brady, Margery Egan. Yesterday afternoon, we spoke with LaTosha Brown. She's one of the co-founders of the voting rights group Black Voters Matter. Here is that conversation. For now, at least, voting rights legislation in the Senate is dead.
There's no effort to suppress the vote. Why have 19 states passed 33 new laws making it harder for Americans to participate in our elections in the aftermath of one of the safest elections in American recent history, where there's virtually no evidence of any material fraud?
This party line push has never been about securing citizens' rights. It's about expanding politicians' power.
The first voice you heard was Majority Leader Democrat Chuck Schumer. The second was Minority Leader Republican Mitch McConnell, speaking as part of 2 consecutive days of debate, which ultimately ended, I'm sure you know, in defeat for the 2 voting rights bills the Democrats were advancing. As the Biden administration seems to be moving on to pieces of Build Back Better and other agenda items, what is next for voting rights advocates? Chief amongst them is LaTosha Brown. She's co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. She was arrested this week on the steps of the Capitol protesting for voters reform. She's free again. She joins us now on Zoom. LaTosha, it is great to see you as always.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Jim.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here. I want to hear what happened in your arrest, but before we get to that, your reaction to what happened with voting rights yesterday, what is this going to mean?
You know, I'm so glad. My answer may be different than what people expect. You know, I watched the debate last night on C-SPAN. I watched the entire debate. And for a minute, it really had me. It made me sad. I was actually really disappointed. I was disappointed in the leadership in this country. And then every once in a while, someone would speak. One of the Democratic leaders that would speak in favor of the bill I would feel a sense of hope, you know, and so I kind of kept going back and forth with that. And I remember at the end, after the vote, in many ways, I just had to sit there in silence and just said, are we really there in 2022? Is this where we are? You know, and then I woke up this morning and had a completely different kind of thinking about it. I actually felt resolute. You know, I felt that this is the moment that part of what has been happening is that we have been playing with kind of this democracy around the edges, and that we're being forced to actually deal with it. We're really being forced to deal with looking at the political structure in this country, looking at the political infrastructure of this country that doesn't lend itself to a pluralism as it's laid out in the Declaration of Independence of what it is that we say we want about democracy. And so I am glad that the debate took place so that people are on record around where they stand and what they don't stand for. I think American people are smarter than I think sometimes electeds give them credit for. It has been I think there is what is really sad is that, you know, the Republican Party, and I think that there are different people on different spectrums in the party. I think that there are people in the party that are willing to do anything for the sake of holding power. I think that there are those who actually, unfortunately, you know, their integrity, if they had any sense of integrity, that the fear of retribution by their party is greater now than them being able to stand in integrity. And I think this is a moment where this question is being pushed back on the American people. And I think we have to answer that question. I think this is the moment that American people have to say, no, we want a democracy, and we're going to hold elected officials accountable for delivering that. And I think this is the moment for us to be very reflective around understanding the fragility of this democracy and what it's going to take for us to get to the place of what is laid out in the Declaration of Independence. In some ways, I think we've been able to skate around this, you know, with the reauthorization of 1965, that democracy had already been established in America. We were there, here we are. And I think at this moment, I think we're able to see, unfortunately, the fragility of this democracy, and to actually see those who are openly standing in the way to undermine it. That's something that should be nonpartisan, something that should not be divisive, like voting rights, a basic. We're not asking for protection rights just for a group of people, just for Black people or Asian people. This is something that will impact all Americans. Why would we not want those who live in Iowa to also have access to vote the same way as those that live in Alabama, that live in California. All of those things will actually impact voters. And while we're very open around, while this was targeted at Black voters, this does not just impact Black voters. Actually, rural voters will be impacted by this as well. And so in this process, I am hoping that this is a reset moment. This is a moment for us to really dig our heels in, that we should lean into this, that I don't think that delay is defeat. I believe that this is a moment for us to get a little bit truer around creating the kind of democracy that we say that we want, but that just has not been fully achieved yet.
I fear, LaTosha Brown, that many people, particularly people who are of goodwill, like living in Massachusetts, where we are right now, don't really get what the threats are. When I was talking to you the other night in Greater Boston, you were in Georgia. I don't know where you are today. And by the way, we should have said LaTosha Brown and her organization are among the reasons Democrats had control to begin with the elections of Senator Ossoff and Reverend Warnock. Reverend Warnock is up for re-election already come November. Can you describe a little bit not only what happened in Georgia, what became law to restrict the voting rights of people, but what is still pending that may become law in the near future? Could you spend a minute on that?
I can. So some of the things that we saw, I'm going to start right after the election last year, the presidential election, and then the U.S. Senate, the special U.S. Senate race that happened in Georgia. What we saw in Georgia immediately was a proposed bill led by the Republicans. It was called SB Senate Bill 202, which essentially did a couple of things. I'll just highlight a couple of things that it did. One, it criminalized organizations that were provide food and water, snacks and water to people standing in lines. That practice was only created because people were standing in line 3, 4, 6, 8, up to 11 hours, right, in line to vote. And so because of that, we know that was difficult and challenging, and we wanted to provide at least some voter comfort care. It doesn't matter who you voted for or how you voted, that we would actually provide some water, some basic water, and snacks for people who are sacrificing to stand in line. That can be resolved if we're creating a process like we're seeing with the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act, that literally if we're creating a process that takes down the barriers for people to be able to register, have longer times to vote, to be able to have absentee ballot voting, to be able to have early voting, all of that will actually help eliminate some of the inconvenience that voters are spending at the polls. In addition to that, we also saw in that same bill, we saw that the Republican Party created a process where they can actually take over the election boards in the state. So in our state, we have this bipartisan election boards in the different counties where there are Republicans that have been appointed and Democrats being appointed. And they collectively, most of these folks have integrity, are experienced people within the electoral process, that there is joint oversight in the process. And quite frankly, they've worked really well together over the years, at least that the process would not be over politicized, that they would use and that it would be some consistency around it. Well, as people may remember or recall, part of the former President Trump called to Georgia and said, I need y'all to find me X amount of votes, right? He was upset that he ran into that wall. Part of that process has been a safety net and oversight so that it would take that you would have bipartisan leaders that were experts in this electoral process and would provide some oversight. And that's what happened. And as a result, he couldn't penetrate that, which is why they came back in this law, in this law that was created, SB 202, they can actually take over the ruling party, can take over who's in the legislature, have the majority in the legislature, can take over the administrative process. And so currently, as we speak right now, I'm a resident in Fulton County, which is the most populous county in Georgia, which is where Atlanta is, that there is an attempt currently, as we speak, to take over the election board in Atlanta. And they've already just indiscriminately been taking people off the election board who have experience, have credibility, and have integrity around this process. In addition to that, what we've also seen is that the Secretary of State, who is given the authority within our state constitution to actually lead the electoral process, which is in most states, right? And that in the state of Georgia, they've even superseded that power, that within this law that they can actually, this committee can actually supersede what the role of the Secretary of State, which is essentially what Trump was asking for. Like if Raffensperger did not do what he wanted to do, then he had another place that he could go. And so they've created that. And so the process has always been, what we're seeing across the board has been three levels or three different strategies. And it's always been the case around voter suppression. One, it's about restricting access, whether that means closing down polling sites, whether that means shortening the time for absentee ballot voting or eliminating it altogether, whether it's early voting, not allowing early voting, or creating barriers for voter registration. We see a lot of that, particularly in southern states or states that have high African-American population. And we've seen the introduction of bills all around this nation to even further restrict that access. The second thing has always been around how do you create a culture of fear, and we think that has been part of their two recent examples around that. One I raised earlier around criminalizing, making it a crime for groups to actually give people water in line, right, while they're standing in line for hours. Another most recent one is something that DeSantis, the governor of Florida, is introducing, which is creating a special police force to oversight elections, so to create this culture of fear. And then this third level has been weaponizing the administrative process to create a process, that administrative process. So now you use that process so that you can give yourself an unfair advantage, that you now start punishing people because they didn't vote the way you wanted them to vote, or to send a message. And what we're seeing that in Georgia, we're seeing that all across the country. So we're seeing these laws come up being proposed by Republicans all across America right now. The challenge is, and I want people to really understand this, while it disproportionately impacts Black voters and voters of color, which is what is targeted, it doesn't just impact Black voters. Rural voters, one of the things that's happening right now in Lincoln County, Georgia, we've had organizers with some of our partners on the ground getting petitions, because right now, as we speak, they are seeking to close every single polling site and only leave one in a county that is primarily rural, where there's no public transportation available. So if you don't have public transportation, here it is an inconvenience, or you may not have time to find a ride, get there, or the resources to get to this one polling site in the entire county. Just think about that. And so we're raising these things because this is what's happening now, really around these egregious acts of criminalizing it, creating this culture of fear, restricting access to the ballot, making barriers for it, make it harder. And then also, when all else fails, just take over the process and even overturn the results because you don't like the results.
We're talking to LaTosha Brown from the Black Voters Matter Fund.
So tell us what was going on in D.C. and what about this arrest. What were people doing down there?
So there were several groups that decided that we were going to come together in the spirit of many of us were organized by leaders in the faith tradition, that there were members that were ministers, rabbis, that there were several that were hunger strikers that have been on a hunger strike for over a week, wanting to raise and amplify this issue, this need for voting rights.
By the way, we had Cornell William Brooks, who was one of those 25 faith leaders on the hunger strike on the other day. But continue, LaTosha.
That's right. Yeah. And Devin Crawford, who works with him over at the William Trotter Center at Harvard. And in addition to that, we had Until Freedom, Unpacked, Black Voters Matter. It was 28 of us. And we decided that we were going to peacefully protest that in the spirit of civil disobedience. It was the day following Dr. King's holiday, the birthday, that if we were going to really be in alignment around and some sense of integrity, that we had to literally be able to not just say the words, but actually do the work. And so we went and peacefully sat on the steps of the U.S. Capitol while the vote was opening up, the session that would call up the vote. We sat there and we sang freedom songs, and we did chants, and we were not disruptive. We sat there to literally be able to amplify that we wanted voting rights and that we expected the Senate. And it's interesting when you look on the backdrop of, we were arrested, right, for peacefully sitting on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. Yet there were those that actually climbed and took over the Capitol. Some of them still are not arrested now. This is a year later, right? So in that spirit, but what we wanted to do in the great tradition of part of democracy, protest is a part of democracy. It's a part of our freedom of speech, right? And we believe that the Capitol is our house, that's not somewhere that we should be excluded from. That is somewhere that we should be welcome. And so in that spirit, we wanted to protest at the same time that this vote was happening, because we wanted to amplify how critical we feel this issue is. And we continue to feel that way, and we will continue to protest, and we will continue to lift our voice, and we will continue to organize, because some of us love this country in such a way that we want to see it at its best self. And we believe that we can get there if we collectively work together.
LaTosha Brown, almost every time I've ever spoken to you, you lay out as well the bill of particulars about the assault on democracy, but then every conversation ends with, I'm listening and I'm saying, this is an existential crisis. Unlike any other, and every time you end with a hopeful message. So for those who hear what you say and say, well, we know what's happening in 19 states with more to come, and you described a little bit of what's happening in Georgia. We know that we are not going to be saved by protection of voting rights from the United States Senate because of unanimous Republican opposition and the opposition of Sinema and Manchin to do the right thing. It's unlikely the Supreme Court is going to do it. So why is despair not the eternal condition for the LaTosha Browns of the world? Why is there hope? Why do you have hope?
It's my right before there's major transformation, there's conflict. There's an intensity around conflict. America, it wasn't like the founders of America just kind of, walked over and was like, oh, this is a good thing to do. It came out of a sense of conflict and a sense of that they needed something, that they weren't a part of the monarchy, that the monarchy was taking their resources. They were paying, then now they were asked to pay this tax on tea, right? And they had no real representation. I can look at most nations that have been created, right? Nation states that have been created, there's been some major evolution. There's been a major evolution. There's been that point of tension. And so in this nation, we see tension as a bad thing. That is a terrible thing, right? Because in many ways, we think of the body politic like we think of our movies. I remember the first time I saw a European movie and the movie didn't end. I was like, wait a minute, where's the hero? And in America, in American movies, we like to see it always works out, right? And so just to take some of that optimism, I have been in this country long enough. I have been a Black person living in America long enough that I will say this: if I didn't have hope, what else would I have? Like what else would I lean into? It has been the hope of others that allow me the opportunity to do the work that I'm doing, right? That has created the space for me to freely be able to move around in the world. It has been the hope of others that has literally created the opportunity for me to teach at Harvard, to be in spaces that I was excluded. My people before me were excluded. It has been the hope of others that allowed my family to be able to send me to school, to be able to take care of me in a way that I never had to experience riding on the back of the bus just because I was Black, right? I've never experienced having to go into a restaurant where there's a white only and a Black only sign, like my mother experienced or like my grandmother experienced. And so each generation, every time that we create hope, right? Every time we generate hope in this space and we see these moments as a moment for us to lean in greater, right? That's where the real change happens. We have to be honest. It's not like without the Voting Rights Act that America is all perfect, that America is fine. We just need to get these two bills, right? No, we've got a lot of things to do. We've got to really look at kind of the economic structure as we're sitting here now, where there are hundreds of families that are literally looking at eviction right now, that eviction in New York and some of the other places, there are hundreds, thousands, millions of people that are living in poverty. We've got 9 people in this nation alone that literally have $950 billion personally, that they're on the road to being a trillionaire. There's something wrong when we're having that kind of system. I I want people to prosper, but I want there to create, I want us to create a system that is actually centers human life and human advancement over kind of the party advancement. Can we not envision this America that instead of just like we're bragging that we're the wealthiest in the world, I want to be able to brag and say we're the healthiest in the world. I want to be in an America that literally, and I see it, just like we've been seeing in our protests, what's made our movement so much stronger is because it's Black people, it's white people, Asian Americans, Latinos. Like, we're building a whole new construct around of a new America that we seek to create. And I have to believe that I'm going to bring that into being, because some of what I'm experiencing right now, I don't want my grandbaby to experience, nor do I want my great-great-grandchildren to experience. So those of us that are visionaries, that really, really love this country, we have to recognize we have no choice but to actually hold this nation to its highest ideas, that we have to hold this nation in a space that we actually recognize that there are more people in this country. I believe it. There are more people in this country that have a vision of the world, that are tired of the fighting, that they understand the hurt and harm of racism, that they understand economic inequality, and they recognize that we are in an abundant earth, that everything that we need, we have available. It has been the political will that has prevented us. And so if we can shift the political paradigm, completely change the landscape, and literally put ourselves in a space of leadership so that the voices and the dinosaurs of old, I was looking at Mitch McConnell, and it's funny because I know in many ways he ruffled so many feathers, and I was looking at him, and all I could think of, that's Custer's last stand. He's like the dinosaur of old. He's still here, but he is the dinosaur of old.
LaTosha Brown, I have 3 words for you. Sign me up. It is great to see you, LaTosha Brown. Thanks so much, and we look forward to talking to you again
Thank
soon.
you very, very much for being with us. We really appreciate it, LaTosha. Thank you.
Thank you, Marjorie. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, talk soon, I hope.
LaTosha, you're fabulous. Thanks so much. It's great to see you.
Thank you all so much for having me. Okay, bye-bye.
LaTosha Brown is the co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund, and we appreciate again very much seeing with her today. Thank you so much.